So anyway, I've been here since I was a coordinator. I did that for about a year, so I was one of the field consultants. Then I came into the office doing like a project coordinator job until I was thankful to accept this position last April. So I've been doing this job for a little over a year, right in the heat of when COVID started. So it's been a crazy year. I'm sure everyone can relate to that. All right, so you've all heard of the National School Lunch Program. This program, the CACFP, is sort of under that same umbrella, but this program is geared towards child and adult care centers. Just like the National School Lunch Program, the CACFP is a voluntary program which enables centers and organizations to provide more nutritious meals to children in their care. So it's a benefit. You should be joining this program to help provide more nutritious meals, not to be able to afford to provide meals. So you should already have the funds, and we'll talk about that later, to operate the program before you even come on. The Child and Adult Care Food Program is a federal program. It's funded by USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture and Food and Nutrition Services, that provides reimbursement for nutritious meals and snacks to eligible children and adults who are enrolled for care in participating child care centers, daycare homes, and adult daycare centers. CACFP also provides reimbursement for meals served to children and youth participating in after-school care programs, children residing in emergency shelters, and I already mentioned adult daycare centers, but adults over the age of 60 or living with a disability who are enrolled in actual adult daycare facilities. So essentially, this program provides a cash reimbursement to all of our participants. One that I left out, like Head Starts, they're also an eligible program that can operate, but it provides cash reimbursements for these types of institutions for meals that they're already providing. Approximately 2/3 of 2 billion meals per year served through this program go to public or private nonprofit childcare and Head Start programs. So we operate different types of programs, but the vast majority of the funding and reimbursement goes to childcare. So who administers the CACFP? USDA Food and Nutrition Services administers the program through grants to the states, and state agencies are responsible for monitoring all institutions participating in the CACFP to ensure compliance with all the different regulations like meal patterns, record keeping, and a slew of other things. The program is then administered within most states by the designated educational agency. In some states, it's administered by different agencies such as like the State Department of Health or Family or Social Services, but it's really up to the discretion of the state's governor to determine who administers the program, and in Oklahoma, it's the State Department of Education. Currently in Oklahoma, I need to update these numbers. I think we only have about 9 adult daycare centers now, a little under 600 institutions. So when we refer to an institution in this program, it's just everyone that operates. So it could be a single-sided or a multi-sided center or family daycare home sponsor. So we have about 600 of those active. We have 19 family daycare home sponsors and then 1 emergency shelter in the whole state. Our numbers have really dropped, and I'm sure that's no surprise because of COVID, but we're starting to kind of rebound. We've got a bunch of brand new applicants, and that's what most of you are right now, and we're super excited. I think I have about 50 that are been waiting to get on, so I'm glad to have you here. So why does the CACFP matter? CACFP's greatest strengths are the benefit it provides for children's health and dietary intake. Research shows that children who are receiving CACFP meals were less likely to be in fair or poor health, and they're less likely to be hospitalized, and also significantly more likely to have a healthy weight and height for their age than children who are only receiving meals from home. Studies also show that low-income children have also found that CACFP participation increased the consumption of milk and vegetables. And that's simply just because you guys have to meet the meal pattern requirements anyways. And unfortunately, sometimes these aren't the things that the children are getting at home. So as you know, if you've been in childcare very long, more times than not, these children are getting more nutritious meals when they're in your care than they are at home. Simply put, CACFP is just an important program that supports the health of infants, toddlers, and adults. In the US each day, more than 4.2 million children and over 130,000 adults receive these nutritious meals and snacks through this program. I need to update these numbers too. So last year in FY 2020, so October, our fiscal year runs October to September. So October of 19 to September 20. In Oklahoma, we served a total, or we reimbursed a total of just under 31 million meals and snacks. And that's just in Oklahoma alone. And that was a lower number because of COVID. So it's a pretty incredible amount of meals and reimbursement that comes through this program, just in our state alone. So who can apply for CACFP? For-profit or nonprofit childcare centers, Head Start programs, family daycare homes through a sponsoring organization, nonprofit organizations who operate at-risk after-school programs, school districts operating at-risk after-school programs, emergency and homeless shelters, and adult daycare centers. And anyone or any responsible person or institution who is on the National Disqualified List, or the NDL as we refer to it, are not eligible to participate. So any of you brand new folks that are on here, that's why we ask for all these individuals' names. If you have a board, we have to have everyone's name. Anyone who will have any type of CACFP responsibility, because we have to check this National Disqualified List and make sure that you are not, unfortunately, hopefully not on it. If you are, then you're not eligible to participate. And what that is and how you get on it is if you've ever been on any federally funded program like this one, and you become seriously deficient and unfortunately can end up being terminated from the program, you'll be put on that list for 7 years. And then if you owe a debt, you would be on it for as long as you owed that debt. So for-profit and nonprofit childcare centers, I think the vast majority of folks on here today are probably a for-profit childcare center. I think we have a couple of nonprofit childcare centers on here as well. But any childcare who is currently licensed through DHS may be eligible to participate in the CACFP in Oklahoma. Regulation requires us to follow state and local licensing laws. And so in Oklahoma, if you care for children, and you guys know that more than 15 hours a week, you have to have a license. So only licensed institutions can participate in Oklahoma. There is an exception to that, and we'll talk about that later. But similar to how school lunches have free, reduced, and paid meals that you might be familiar with, CACFP uses the same income application, which what we call is the family size and income application, to determine the category a child falls into. Unlike the National School Lunch Program and CACFP, children don't pay for meals regardless of how they qualify. The application just it's used to simply determine the category the child falls into, which then in turn determines the rate in which the center will be reimbursed for the meals provided to that child. The more low-income children a center has enrolled, the higher reimbursement rate a center will receive for those meals. For-profit centers must have at least 25% of their enrolled children that fall into the free or reduced categories to be eligible to participate. Or if you're Title 20, you have to have at least 25% of those children enrolled to be eligible. And so every month when you claim, you have to report that participation data to ensure that you're eligible to participate. Nonprofit childcare centers who have a current active 501c3 which is proof of their nonprofit status, they don't have to meet that 25% rule. They're eligible simply because they're a nonprofit institution. Examples of those type of institutions would be like a faith-based childcare center, military bases, community action agency, or other community-based organizations. We have many different tribal organizations that operate, and they're considered nonprofit entities as well. And many times those that are on a tribal license, they have their own licensing standards, but we honor those and move a DHS license. Then some centers might have multiple sites, such as like a La Petite or a Child Time, for an example. And in these cases, the institution is considered what we call a sponsoring organization. A sponsoring organization is just someone with more than one site. The SO, for short, is responsible for training and monitoring the sites under their sponsorship to ensure all their sites meet program compliance. So then like the SO will submit the claims for reimbursement for all the sites, and all the funds are paid to the sponsor. And then they disperse those payments. Or many times, like our sponsors of centers, they might absorb all the cost of the meals and just provide meals directly to their sites. So they wouldn't necessarily be paying their sites. But regardless, the payment on those multi-sided ones, it's just a lump payment to the sponsor. Head Start program. I don't know if we have any Head Starts in here today. I'm not sure, but the Healthy Meals for Americans Act allows children who are enrolled in a federally funded Head Start program to be automatically eligible for free meal benefits. So like I said before, in your regular centers, you have to have the 25% free and reduced, and all the enrolled children have to fill out that income application to determine that. In a Head Start, they're automatically free. And so there are no income applications collected, and it's for those institutions, that's really the only difference for Head Start programs, is that they don't have to collect the income application. They do have to collect the documentation for the Head Start enrollees, and they have to update their information annually, and they have to collect an enrollment form like all the other types of organizations. And they also have to retain their records for the required amount of time, both for us and Head Start. So we require records to be kept for the current year and 3 years past. So like I said, basically the only difference from a Head Start program is they're exempt from having to collect that income application, unlike the other daycares. Family daycare home sponsors, we don't have any in here, and I won't go on too much about that. Family daycare home sponsors, they're just kind of their own little beast. There's just so much that's different about family daycare home sponsors. But if we had, for any family daycare home provider in the state of Oklahoma or in the nation that wants to participate in the CACFP, they have to, quote, contract, that's what I always refer to it as, but they have to be under a sponsor. We work with the sponsors of family daycare homes, and the sponsors work with the providers. So they go to the sponsor and sign up with them, and the sponsor is responsible for ensuring those providers program compliance. They aren't really contracted. Nobody's really contracted with this because the application agreement is permanent, but most SOs have their providers sign a yearly contract to ensure they remain with them, because family daycare home sponsors are paid a little differently than any other institution. They get paid an administrative fee. So they get a certain amount of money per provider to pay for their administrative cost. Whereas like a sponsor of centers, you can use a portion of the reimbursement you receive. Family daycare homes get paid per provider because those provider payments go directly to the provider. So, and like I said, we don't have any family daycare homes in here, and I'm not going to go a whole lot into that, but providers, there's different rates providers paid at depending on the area that they live in, the lower income areas that they live in, the higher rate they'll be paid at. And there's lots of different ways that we can get them paid at the higher rate. We can look at their area eligibility, their school, their census data, and then we also look at income. Oops, I went way far ahead. Nonprofit at-risk organizations. So I know we've got maybe a couple of those in here. I know we got some Head Starts. Thank you guys for letting me know the types that are in here. I try to scroll through the participant list to see if I can remember who's what. So the at-risk after-school program is aimed to provide meals to school-age children in low-income areas after the school day is ended. To qualify, the organizations must be tax-exempt status by obtaining a 501c3. So examples of these types of institutions would be like a food bank or community action type of agency. The majority of these organizations in our state are multi-sided with unaffiliated sites. Affiliated means it's part of that institution or organization or business's legal entity, or they might have some other type of legal responsibility. The vast majority of our other sponsors like sponsors of centers, they're all affiliated. Like Head Starts, they're affiliated through their Head Start grantee and things like that. And it's typically just our nonprofit at-risk organizations that have unaffiliated sites. And when that happens, we have to make sure we have the proper agreement in place so that we're, they're not just using some site without someone's permission, basically. As I stated before, USDA requires our programs to follow state and local law when it comes to childcare licensing. And in Oklahoma, there are many exemptions to why a childcare license would not be required. But generally, most of our at-risk sites are exempt from licensing law because they operate less than 15 hours a week. So in Oklahoma, like I said, if you care for kids more than 15 hours a week, a license is required. So for these institutions that aren't licensed, they have to get an exemption from DHS stating that they don't have to have one. And it's a pretty easy process. We have instructions in our resource library that you have access to. Many of you don't have access to our system yet because it's not granted until after the VCA is approved. But you can get into our resource library. So if you go to our website where you did that first initial application, you can find our resource library. And there's instructions there on how to get an exemption. And I'm not sure if we have any at-risk in here, but basically all you have to do is just email the area consultant or the area licensing specialist and say like, hey, I'm this kind of program. I'm located at this address. We operate these many hours a week. Do I qualify for this exemption? And we have a list of those exemptions. It's an actual link in there to the law and the exemptions. There's lots of reasons you could be exempt. At-risk sites must be located within an area that's considered to be low income. So the purpose of the at-risk programs is to target low income areas, obviously, and that's why they're considered at-risk. To figure eligibility, we look at the school that's assigned to the address, and then we look at what we call the low income report, which comes out of our national school lunch program. That's put out typically every year, but COVID has messed that up. So we've been using the same low income report for the last 2 years. But every school has to do their low income report and report the number of free, reduced, and paid kids they have to determine their low income status, basically. So then we can use that report, and that's what we use in the state of Oklahoma to determine area eligibility for at-risk programs. I had a question, do you need an approved license exemption every year? No. I would say no. I mean, unless something programmatically changed or if you move locations, but no, we wouldn't require that every year. As long as you're operating in the same place and nothing's changed, you're good. That requirement, though, doesn't apply to schools. I failed to mention that because schools already care for school-age children and they're a public institution kind of in their own little group. So that the licensing exemption would not be required for schools. I'm glad you asked that. I don't know if you were with the school, but I forgot to say that. So thank you. The one thing about at-risk though, if they're in the eligible area, they're eligible to participate. They don't have to do the income applications because they're considered high risk, at risk, I mean. So their meals reimbursed in that program are all at the paid rate, the higher rate. But they do have to have an educational or enrichment program. I will go back and say right now there is a COVID waiver that's waiving that area eligibility. So if you are interested in at-risk and you aren't typically in an area that would be considered eligible, we do have that waiver in place, but it ends the last day of June next year, which could be maybe not worth your time because that's right smack dab in the middle of our fiscal year. So anyway, if you're interested, you're welcome to email me. In the event that a SO sees a need at a site located in a school district, priority is always given to the school, especially if the school is already operating another national or other nutrition program like the National School Lunch. So if some nonprofit agency was like, hey, I want to go serve at school ABC, we would first ask the school if it's okay or if they're interested in operating. And if they have no interest and are okay with that organization to operate there, then by all means they can operate there. And as with any other SO, these SOs are responsible for training and monitoring their sites to ensure program compliance. And I mentioned that it has included an educational enrichment program. So a lot of them are like tutoring or different things like that. It has to be something It has to be a true educational enrichment program. It can't be like sports. You can include sports, organized sports, but it can't be just like, hey, I want to feed the football team on Friday nights before the games. Although that's great, you would have to open it up to all of the children and the football team could just happen to participate. Public school districts operating at risk, and we have some in here. Everything that I just said about at risk applies to schools. However, you don't need a 501c3 to prove your nonprofit status, nor license exemption. There is one difference for a school, is that you actually have the option to serve the meal before the end of the school day. So like your nonprofit institutions, it has to be the after school because they don't have the school kids until after school. But for school districts that operate the at-risk, USDA regulations state that the at-risk meals can be served after the school day has been completed. Many schools in our state have what's considered an extended learning period that goes beyond what the state requires as a full day. In Oklahoma, that's 6 hours of rigorous educational hours. So once 6 hours of education have been completed, school day is considered complete. Therefore, many schools choose to offer their at-risk meal during the 7th period. So it's not after the 6th hour of school, or the 6th period. It's after the 6th hour of education has been completed. Like I said, that's usually during the 7th hour or the 7th period of school. So that's one thing that schools can do different than nonprofits. Same thing goes for school districts. If they're multi-sited, they still have to train and monitor all their sites to ensure program compliance. And that's one thing I didn't really mention, that all of our sponsors, multi-sited, have to conduct monitoring reviews 3 times a year for all their sites to ensure program compliance. And for you newbies that are in here, there is a training specifically for sponsoring organizations that you will have to attend later. It's a pretty short 1-hour training that Kendra does, and it will go into more detail on that. Emergency homeless shelters are eligible to participate. Like I said, we only have one in the state, but to be eligible, the shelter must be a public or private nonprofit institution or a temporary residential site householded by a public or private nonprofit agency. Okay, so Deborah, are you with the school? Okay, so, and I just asked that because most of our schools, we have waivers. We have the same waivers schools have. USDA has put out several waivers throughout COVID that allows you to serve in a different capacity to accommodate virtual learning, quarantine, and all that. So we do have the non-congregate, the parent pickup, and all that. So yes, meals can be sent home with students and they can be claimed, but it still has to include the educational handout, just a slip or something. A lot of schools had a slip with a website to place with educational activities, or even just, it could just be I don't know, some kind of educational activity on a piece of paper, but you do have to show you're doing some type of enrichment or education. Those COVID waivers apply to everyone. Most of our daycares are operating as normal now, but if something were to happen and you had some kind of breakout in COVID or what have you, we have things in place that can help accommodate that. They're all set to expire June 30th of 2022. So just be sure that if anything were to happen to cause you to have that need, just reach out to us and we can help you. So like I said, emergency shelters, we only have one in the state. They participate in CACFP. They provide residential and food services to children experiencing homelessness. CACFP serves children, including teenagers 18 years and younger, who are emergency shelter residents. Residents who receive their meals at the shelter are automatically eligible for free meals. That's the one thing about emergency shelters too, just like at risk, they don't, and Head Starts, they don't have to do the income application. They're all considered at the free rate. So that is the one difference with homeless shelters too. They don't have to collect those income applications. Adult daycare centers, I don't think we have any here, maybe one. I think I've got one new that applied, but okay, good. Adult daycare centers are considered eligible institutions for reimbursement for meals served to persons 60 years of age or older. Oh, I got 2, good. or to chronically impaired disabled persons in a non-residential group setting. For the purposes of determining CACFP eligibility, it is sufficient that such a center cares for elderly or functionally impaired adults. It is not necessary that the majority of the clients receiving care in the center be functionally impaired, though. The adult daycare component of the CACFP offers federal funding for meals to adult daycare centers. These centers enable elderly and disabled adults to remain in their own home or in the home of a family member, guardian, or other caregiver to avoid premature institutionalization. So the CACFP plays a vital role in improving the quality of their daycare and making it more affordable for many low-income families. In Oklahoma, adult daycare centers are licensed by the health department, so they also have to have a current license, which sometimes can be challenging. If I'm not mistaken, I think those have an expiration every year, and they're not always super on top of getting you guys a updated one. So we work with you when that happens. The purpose of the adult daycare component of the CACFP is to assist participants to remain in the community, enabling families and other caregivers to continue caring for an impaired individual at home. So that's pretty much it. I lost my place. We don't have, like I said, I think we have 9 active adult daycare on our program right now. So I'm glad to see a couple of you in here. So who's eligible to receive meals? In childcare centers, family daycare homes, Head Starts, it's children up to the age of 13. Unless there's some kind of documented mental or physical disability, children in childcare are eligible up to the age of 18. Then your at-risk programs and emergency shelters, that's for children up to the age of 19. And then in adult daycare centers, it's impaired adults or adults over 60 and enrolled in a daycare. And generally, if you have an individual with any type of disability, they can remain in childcare, like I said, up until that age of 18. And typically they're going to move to adult care after that age anyways, if not before. And then at that point, those 19 and up are eligible in an adult daycare setting. So meal pattern requirements, just briefly, I'll go over some of that because all of you newbies will have to take a meal patterns requirement class as well. In 2010, the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act allowed USDA, does age matter in a school setting? If you're doing at risk, I think I already asked you that. Oh yeah, so it's up to the age of 19, once they're older than 19. But you don't, in those situations, we wouldn't ask, or we wouldn't make them prove their age unless it's just obvious that they're way older than what they should be to receive the meal. So in 2010, USDA made changes for the first time in like 30 years to make some real changes to school and breakfast meal patterns. Most of the changes at that time really happened in schools. It wasn't until 2017 when the Healthy Hungry Free Kids Act finally made changes to CACFP and those were implemented. So for the last now 5 years, we keep calling them the new meal patterns, but they're not new anymore. We had a grace period that we didn't disallow if you weren't meeting them, but that's over. You have to be meeting meal patterns, and we do. There is some flexibilities with meal patterns because of COVID, but it's one of those just case-by-case situations. So unless otherwise noted, you should be following meal patterns as best as you can. So like I said, there's a pretty big overhaul and major changes. And I'll just quickly, like I said, they're new changes. They're not new anymore, and you wouldn't have known anyways the old ones, but here's what changed. Infants used to be in 3 categories, and now they're just 2 age groups. So before it was 0 to 3, 4 to 7, 8 to 11 months, and now it's just 0 to 5 and 6 to 11 months is the age groups for infants. The new meal patterns made serving only breast milk or formula at any meal for a child under 1 to be creditable. Now that doesn't mean you're not required to serve those other components. It's just allowing flexibility because sometimes you have parents that don't want their child to be served anything other than breast milk or formula until the age of 1. And the other requirements before required at the age of 8 months to implement or introduce certain foods. It was required to be introduced by 4 months, and then it was required to be served by 8 months. Now it's just a best practice. Providers are encouraged, along with parents, to introduce solids as the child is developmentally ready. And like I said, while also still respecting a parent's choice. And sometimes if you guys have been in childcare long enough, sometimes you get some interesting parent preferences. So it's kind of allowing you to be able to accommodate those. But once a child's developmentally ready, a fruit or vegetable is now required for snack for 6 to 11 months old. So that was changed. And then juice was also eliminated altogether from the infant meal patterns. Before it was allowed, but juice is no longer allowed for infants. And then they included ready-to-eat cereals. So before, things like Cheerios weren't allowed as a snack. And that's typically like a first food for a kiddo. So those are an allowed snack now. For children older than 1, prior to 17, the fruit and vegetable component was combined. So that meant like they were only required to serve a certain amount of any fruit and or vegetable to meet the requirement. And now they're separate in our meal or in our lunch and supper. So for lunch and supper, 1 of each is required. But then they came out with changes that will allow you, there's always exceptions to all of CACFP rules. You can actually serve 2 vegetables. You can serve a vegetable in lieu of a fruit. Basically, you just can't serve 2 fruits, but I don't know anybody that wants to do that anyhow. Juice is limited to once per day. So before there was no limit, now you can only be menued once a day. At least 1 serving of grain must be whole grain rich. So if you guys are with the schools, you're used to serving whole grain rich stuff. And in CACFP, you have to serve at least 1 meal has to contain it. So if you're an at-risk and all you're going to serve is 1 meal or 1 snack, that meal has to contain the whole grain rich item. And in our meal patterns training, there's great detail on how to determine a whole grain rich item. Things like grains-based desserts like cookies, cake, brownies, those no longer count towards a creditable meal. So prior to 17, you could serve all kinds of cookies all day long, and it was a creditable snack, but not now. Meat and meat alternates may be served in place of a grain component for breakfast up to 3 times per day. So that was an interesting change. Tofu now counts as meat. And then they added a new age group for the ages 13 to 18 years old. In 17, up until that time, we only had it up to the age of 12, but we have so many participants in at risk that they've added that age group so that there's a very specific serving size for that age group. There were some changes to the amount of sugar that could be in certain things like yogurt and breakfast cereal. Yogurt can't have more than 23 grams of sugar per 6 ounces. And I know I'm just throwing a bunch of stuff out there at you guys. You will get all this in your meal patterns training. Breakfast cereal can't contain more than 6 grams of sugar per dry ounce. And then they also changed that unflavored whole milk must be served to 1-year-olds. Then unflavored low-fat or fat-free milk must be served to children 2 to 5. So once they're a year old, you have to switch them to low-fat or fat-free milk. Flavored fat-free milk can be served to children 6 years and older or adults, but children under that age can't have flavored. So a meat alternate is required to be served at lunch and supper, and it can be one of the items offered at snack. If they're not a whole type of unprocessed meat or described exactly like they're listed in the food buying guide, which when you guys get to that point, we send out a box for your approval. If you're a new one, you'll get one of those food buying guides. I recommend though you download the app because you can just search for any food item and it'll tell you if it's creditable or not, but it's like a food Bible, what we refer to it as. If it's not in the food buying guide, then it's not considered a real food, and you would need some type of supplemental information to tell us how much needs to be served to meet the requirement. So those are often referred to as a child nutrition label or a CN label. And there's also product formulation statements you can get from the manufacturer. And it's going to be on items like chicken nuggets, hot dogs, turkey lunch meat, any type of lunch meat, fish sticks. It's going to be items that aren't pure, some chicken breast or chicken leg or ground beef. It's something that's processed, and it's generally got fillers and other things and breading. And the label tells us this is how many of these nuggets you have to get this many ounces of meat. Grains required to be served at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which you can substitute, a meat for a grain now 3 times a week. And it can be one of the items offered at snack. Grains can be tricky when it comes to serving sizes, especially now. Instead of we had it where you just served it by servings, now you have to measure by ounce equivalents, which we also have training on that. It's not required, but highly recommended that you learn how to properly measure your grains to know that you're serving the proper amount. You would think all slices of bread were created equal, but they're not. Some slices don't give you just a hair less than what you need. So I would recommend you take the grains ounce equivalence training to learn that. Vegetables and fruit, both are required at lunch and supper, but like I said, you can actually serve 2 vegetables, and either a fruit or vegetable is required at breakfast. Either can be offered at snack. And then milk is required at breakfast, lunch, and supper, and can be offered at snack. Milk is just milk. Nothing takes the place of milk. Cheese and all your other yogurt, all your other dairy things, credit towards your meat component. Milk is just milk. And it has to be cow's milk, unless there's some documented reason why the child can't have it. It has to have a medical statement. So what meals can be claimed for reimbursement? Different meal combinations are allowed for CACFP than that are allowed for at-risk. As you can see on your page, all of the types of entities except at-risk can claim only a maximum of 2 main meals and 1 snack, or 1 main meal and 2 snacks. At-risk programs are only eligible to claim 1 meal and 1 snack. Although when we're approving applications and mealtime services, many of our institutions may be approved for more meal services than what's allowed to be claimed, because you may have children that come and go through the day. So any site can have up to 2 meal services of the following meal types: breakfast, AM snack, lunch, PM snack, supper, and a late PM snack. However, you can't claim more than the maximum allowed per child that you see on your screen. So you might, and many times institutions are serving children way more than what you can claim, but this is the maximum amount that you are eligible to claim per program. How are reimbursements calculated? So I've talked a little bit about this throughout the slides so far. Claims are submitted by each institution. They must be submitted within 60 days of the last month, or you're not eligible for reimbursement. They're technically due on the 10th of each month. Way back when we used to only pay 1 time a month. If you missed it, if you didn't get in by the 10th, you just had to wait till next month. It was late, Now that everything's electronic, it's easier for us to pay, and we pay every week except for the last full week of the month. So childcare, the centers, as discussed earlier, the income applications are used to determine what category each child is claimed at. For each meal type, there's a free rate, a reduced rate, and a paid rate. And the claim will use those rates to calculate the claim. So it's kind of a sliding scale. Centers have to report how many children they have that qualify as free, reduced, and what we call not eligible children that participate each month. And then the system will calculate it when you put in those meal counts. Although the children, they're called free, reduced, and not eligible, it doesn't mean the child's not eligible for the meal. It's just the category they fall into, and that's the lowest rate that you'll be reimbursed at for that child's meal. Sponsors of centers can use up to 15% of their total reimbursement to pay for approved administrative cost. Head Start programs, these children all are automatically considered in the free category. So when institutions enter the claims, all meals will be paid at the highest rate, the free rate for each meal type. Family daycare homes, we kind of talked about that briefly, and I'm not going to really go into it, but sponsors of family daycare homes will report all the meal counts for those providers, and depending on whether they're paid at the higher rate or the lower rate, or sometimes they're a mix of the two, the system will calculate it based on the number of meal counts. And then the sponsors are also paid their administrative fee, so they get a certain amount per provider, and that's what they use to operate their program. At-risk programs, just like our Head Starts, and same thing for emergency home shelters, they're all paid, they're paid at the highest rate. They're all considered categorically free. So you're going to enter the meal types, and you'll be paid at the highest rate for at-risk program and emergency homeless shelters. We tend to talk only about SOs and how they can use reimbursement to pay for administrative costs, but really any institution can use CACFP funds to pay for allowable and approved administrative costs, but it's got to first be in your approved budget. And if I have a class, it was this morning, I don't know if any of you took that one yet because you're not quite there yet, but for you newbies, that'll be one of the classes you have to take, and we'll go through how to fill out the online application part, and the budget's in there, and we'll talk about how to fill it out. But ultimately, this program is designed to be a cost reimbursement. So institutions have to remain in a nonprofit status within the food service program, meaning you have to spend all this money that you get in reimbursement on food, milk, food-related items, or other approved administrative costs. You have to show that you're not making a profit off this program. And that's what we mean when we say you have to be in a nonprofit status, even if you're a for-profit institution. But, and we'll talk about it when we get to the DCA pages here in a minute, you also have to have enough income to show that you're financially viable without these funds. I already said that about how we pay. We pay every week except for the last full week of the month. It's important to know that sometimes things happen out of our control. Our system may fail us, or the funding didn't come from USDA, like, you know, COVID has interrupted that. There's just sometimes things that will cause us not to be able to pay on schedule per se. And it's alarming to us the amount of phone calls we get of upset participants when they call when we miss a payment, because you should be able to operate without these funds. And you'll hear that more than once when we're talking about VCA. It's hard to accept, especially when you're counting on it, but you really shouldn't be. It's a reimbursement, it's not income. And then all institutions that accept family daycare homes, something I didn't mention, you get an additional payment for cash in lieu instead of commodities. A few years ago, we changed it in CACFP where you could choose whether you wanted cash in lieu of commodities, or you could choose to receive commodity foods. And we just didn't have very many that chose to receive commodities. So in CACFP, and this even applies for schools, while you operate CACFP, if you might receive commodities on the school side, you're going to get the cash in lieu in CACFP. And basically, there's just a rate that DHS gives us, and we multiply it by the number of suppers, lunch and suppers you claim, and you get an additional amount tacked onto your payment each month for that cash in lieu. So administrative reviews and other oversight. So once you're approved and you're operating, what do you expect? So we have to conduct an administrative review or an AR every 3 years. That's regulatory. We have 16 area consultants, and depending on their caseload, and some may have the ability or just choose to review every 2 years. And some of our institutions sometimes just need more help than others. So some may get it more often than every 3 years, but at the very most, you will never go more than 3 years without having an administrative review. And then we have to review a certain percentage each year too. And so sometimes you might get picked back to back just because we have to review 34% of all of our institutions every year. Claim validation is a new process that we started. We're still trying to work out the kinks on that, but the purpose of a claim validation is just to help us find any high risk claims or find any errors in claiming. We've done a couple of batches of these, and it's helped me find some flaws in our system. It's also helped us find some institutions that were making mistakes that they just didn't know they were making. So we pull claim data and we look at some of the things that are happening, and depending on the different risk indicators, like if you claim every day of the month, or if you claim maximum capacity for every meal, or if you're claiming at-risk meals that aren't after school, like things like that that are red flags, like, hey, is this claim, you know, can we validate this claim, or is something going on? So we'll do that 3 times a year is how we're doing those claim validations. If you're up for review, you wouldn't be picked. But it could happen, and it's just a little mini review. We'll ask for your supporting documentation just to make sure, you know, you may have had those risk indicators, but it may come out that you did everything exactly like you were supposed to, and everything's fine. We provide technical assistance when requested. So we're always telling everyone, like, if you need help, if you're unsure of anything, ask for help. Contact our office, contact anyone here in this office, contact your consultant once you know who your consultant is. Because if you wait until the time of the review, it's too late. We can't we can't provide technical assistance during a review. At that point, we're going to have to do the review, and unfortunately, it could end in some repayment of meals, or you could be found seriously deficient if it's issues bad enough. So if you're not even sure, if you're unsure, if there's any question in your mind that you don't understand something, please reach out and ask for help. We have ongoing training throughout the year. So all of you new ones in here, this is just the first of several trainings you'll have to attend. They're pretty short. Right now, though, it might be kind of confusing, and I'll probably say this a little later. So COVID's really changed how we conduct our training. Prior to COVID, we just had every Tuesday, it was the second and fourth Tuesday, I don't know, I can't remember. We did one long training that was like 6 to 8 hours, and it went over the entire CACFP manual. Well, aside from the fact it's really hard for some of you guys to devote an entire day to training, because you wear about 12 different hats and you just don't have time. We were able to break the trainings up into smaller, more manageable, meal patterns, administrative and purchasing, things like that. So that's kind of cool, but right now we're doing the whole CACFP manual it's a 6-hour training. And we're not doing the broken up ones because training is required now for all of our participants. And so we kind of had to put them all back together and do one comprehensive training for all our renewing applicants. So depending on how you look at that, it's either you're getting away with just one long training, or you're like, oh, I got to sit through a 6-hour training. So depending on where you're at after you get your VCA approved, I'll send you the information on what trainings you need to attend, and it'll tell you whether you can attend the full CACFP meal pattern training. But probably towards the end of next month, we'll start offering our broken up sections of classes where it's meal patterns and sponsor and this and that. So I've mentioned that SD a couple of times. So I just want to highlight this so that it's never a surprise, but at some point it's possible that you could have a review or have a claim validation or have something that can result in a serious deficiency. It's not our goal, but it happens. Generally, it's a result of an administrative review where the severity of the non-compliances were just too great and rose to the level of an SD. Some of the reasons you could be SD would be inadequate record keeping, claiming meals that weren't served to participants, claiming meals that were not reimbursable. Generally, it's just poor record keeping. Once you're found SD, you have the opportunity to correct the areas of non-compliance, and the SD can be temporarily deferred, but your SD never goes away. So if you're ever SD for something, you cannot, you just really can't make that same error again, or you could be terminated. And if you get terminated, you go on that NDL like I talked earlier. SD institutions and working through the SD process takes up so much of our time, unfortunately. The CACFP has quite a bit of fraud, and I jokingly say, like, we don't use that F word lightly because we just can't make accusations. We have to have proof, we have to back it up, and sometimes it's just a lot of work, and it's just very few that we spend a good amount of our time working on, and it's unfortunate. More times than not, folks that are SD, it's not good record keeping. So like I said, if you ever question what you're doing and you're not sure it's good enough, holler at us, reach out to us, because we want you to be successful in this program. Okay. So how's COVID changed CACFP? I kind of talked about that earlier. We have all these waivers in place. There's the non-congregate feeding, which allows you to feed children not in a group setting, which is typically required in CACFP in all of our programs. There's the meal service time flexibility, because there's situations where you might be sending meals home, you might be sending more than one at a time, so it sort of makes meal service time a moot point. Meal pattern flexibility, we have not opted into this for CACFP. It's not out of the question though, because I know we're starting to experience some food shortage and certain more container shortage issues than we are food. Like you can't find cups and styrofoam plates and things like that if that's what you use. But the parent guardian pickup, which would allow, someone asked earlier, if you're a school and you've got COVID outbreak and you got to send everyone home, you're still eligible to claim these meals and a parent can come pick them up. You just got to have the proper waiver completed. So if there's anything that's causing you to need to operate differently than normal, reach out to the person that will be assigned your application or me, and we'll get you set up. I talked about the area eligibility waiver, that if you want to do at risk and you're not normally in an area that would qualify. And then if you're a sponsor, we do have a monitoring waiver. So you are required to conduct monitoring reviews every, well, you can't go more than 6 months without seeing your sites. And you have to do 3 a year. And like I said, in the multi-sited training that you have to attend anyway, we'll go more into detail with that, but the waiver doesn't waive the fact that you have to monitor your sites. It just monitors, or it just waives that you have to go on site. So we've done the vast majority of our reviews this last year as what we call a desk review. So we've requested your documentation and done it remotely. We've gotten back out there more, but just depending on how this COVID goes and the new variants and all that, it could go back to more off-site reviews, but we do have those flexibilities. So how do you apply for the CACFP? Most of you, that's why you're here. The process to apply can be pretty lengthy depending on, on how long it takes you to complete some things. The VCA typically takes the longest. Before you even start, you got to go on. Most of you have already done this. You've completed the online application, and then I've sent you the preliminary application questionnaire thing. And with that, you need to send it back to me with your license. If you're a nonprofit, a 501c3. What else? Oh, the DUNS. So that's one thing that throws everyone off. You have to have a DUNS number. But just having that number isn't enough. You have to also register that number at sam.gov. So if you've got an email back from Duns and Bradstreet that says, hey, here's your number, and then I tell you I need the expiration date, and then you ask Duns and Bradstreet, what's my expiration date? Duns and Bradstreet's going to say, well, this number doesn't expire, which is true. What expires is the registration on sam.gov. So literally sam.gov, www.sam.gov. You have to go there and register that, and it has to be renewed every year. So if you haven't done that yet, it takes some time, so go there and do it. If you need the instructions, it's in our resource library. Okay, so like I said, most of you are probably here because a lot of you, I emailed you late on Friday and was like, hey, we have this training and it's going to go over this VCA. So you should have received this document. The VCA has got to be completed for any new applicant, and it's got to be completed, and we're gradually working this into our renewal application. So everyone's having to provide this type of information. You won't go any further in this process than in the application process until this document is approved. Okay. So what is VCA? We have lots of acronyms and these programs, as I'm sure you've already noticed. But per USDA regulation, new institutions are required to comply with brief performance standards. And then each year upon application renewal, like I said, our renewing institutions also have to comply with these. So the first one's financial viability and financial management. So that's where the V comes from. An institution can demonstrate that, but it has to demonstrate that it has adequate financial resources to operate this program on a daily basis without our funds. So you've got to have some other funding to operate this program. You also can demonstrate that through a budget or a management plan that's in compliance with all the regulations and shows it has reasonable and necessary and allowable expenses, which you will do in the application. And then again, you have to show you have adequate resources for daily operations, so that you're able to pay employees and suppliers in periods of payment interruptions, which happens. Or if there are situations where you have fiscal claim, fiscal action is what we refer to it as. So if we come out and do a review and we assess fiscal action, that means we're going to take some money back. So you have to have funds other than our funds to pay those things back. And you can also show it through audits or financial statements. So if you're a nonprofit organization and you're already receiving some type of outside organizational audit, that's perfect what we need. But for a lot of our institutions that come on that aren't nonprofit or a larger organization, you're not getting those audits. What is required is bank statements. And I'll go a little more into detail, not just bank statements, but other type of financial statements. And we'll talk about that on the next page. The C for VCA is administratively capable. There are ways that you can show that is telling us the number of staff and the type of qualified staff you have, make sure that they're adequate. Got to make sure your number of monitoring staff in relation to the number of facilities is adequate. So that would only apply to sponsoring organizations. Then you have to have written policies and procedures to make sure you're fulfilling your program responsibilities and your civil rights requirements. And then the A is for program accountability. So ways to make sure you're accountable, you have oversight through operating governing board, or if you don't have a board, that would be the owners or the person in charge of your institution or your center. And like I said, when we use the word institution, we're talking about you. An institution is a daycare center, an institution is a sponsor. Other ways would be telling us written accountability. What are your accountability systems to ensure integrity of how your funds and expenses and revenues are all recorded? Just record keeping all around. How are you maintaining your records of your operations and your meal counts and all that? How are you making sure meal patterns and meal service requirements are met? Licensing requirements, all those things show accountability that you're making sure you're in compliance with regulation. But like I said, financial viability is the hardest one. We can teach you the regs and we can teach you how to keep records, but we cannot teach you how to not rely on these funds. They're helpful, but they're just a cost reimbursement. So the financial viability and financial management section's the hardest. You have to. Sorry about that. So there's regs. We got regs. We've always got regs. And basically we're stating the regs where these requirements are coming from and asking you to say, yes or no, do you understand these requirements? Each institution has to submit information sufficient to document that it's financially viable, administratively capable, and then it's also accountable. And that's what these regs are talking about. Oops, I do that a lot. Okay, so this down here in this one, institutions must demonstrate that it has adequate financial resources to operate CACFP on a daily basis. You can read all that. That one's going back to financial viability. Is this form completed in addition to the VC section of the online application? If you're brand new, yes. If you're SD, yes. If you're a renewing institution and you're in here to learn, no. So I don't know your situation, Vanessa, so I hope that answered your question. So you have to check, okay, you have to check here A, B, or C, and that's one that gets, here's our C. Oh no, I only put A. I need to put a B and C on there. Oops, okay. So you're going to either submit, if you have some type of audit to show your financial viability, you can do that with an audit that you have about schools. If you're brand new, this applies to every type of institution. If you're brand new or you're SD, you have to do this separate document. And if you're just in here to learn and know how to do that first new form on the online checklist, which our newbies wouldn't know about yet, you don't have to do this separate document, but it talks about some of those questions that you need help answering here in a minute. What you guys, if you're renewing and you're not SD, you're not brand new, you don't have to submit these financials that I'm talking about. Okay, so you're going to check one of these three things, whichever one's applicable to your institution. There's only three options. You have an audit, and that's going to show your financial viability, because if there's any issues, it's going to be in your audit. So your schools, if you're a new school, if you're a new nonprofit organization, that one's going to be for you. But everyone else, you're going to have to submit all these different types of statements of financial documentation, bank records, credit card records, financial statements, something from if you have a CPA they can produce, either for 12 months, or if you haven't been in operation for 12 months, as many months as you can. The reason we've got to look at those, if you're SD, we're looking to make sure you're financially viable. We're also looking to see that you are only spending the money on allowable cost. If you're brand new, it's mostly just looking at financial viability right now. On review, we look at your bank records too, to, when we come out and do our administrative review, we look at your bank records then to make sure you're spending your money wisely. This is the one that trips people up the most, because it's like, why are you wanting to look at my bank records? Why? You don't have the right to look at that. Well, here's the issue, is that any account that we deposit these federal funds into, we have to look at, because we have to trace the federal dollar. So if at any point you don't want to provide those documents, that's a red flag to us. You do have the option to have an account solely for CACFP, and that would be my guidance. That's the cleanest, most clear-cut way. Once you come on and you're approved, or even if you're SD and you're trying to get things worked out and going in the right direction, if you have an account just for CACFP and we deposit those funds into that account and all you spend from that account is CACFP allowable cost, then that's the most clear-cut way to operate this program. Now, we still have to see that you're financially viable. We will still ask that you show us some statements from another account that shows you have other income coming in, that yeah, you're a profitable institution that you can operate without our fund. So this is one that gets confused a lot. If you check A, you're turning in an audit. If you check this B, where I've just realized I've left off a B, it's not some of these things, it's all of these things. It's 12 months worth of all these records to show us. And then C, where I've left off the C, is if you've been operating less than 12 months, that's the exception to not supplying 12 months worth. This question here, institutions must have adequate resources. This is just restating that reg that said you have to do this. And we asked you if you understood. So we want you to tell us, in the unfortunate times and periods of program payment interruptions, when this could happen, what are the other funds you're going to use to operate? Is it DHS subsidy? Is it private pay fees? If you're a school, is it other title money? Is it your general fund? In the event that we aren't able to pay you on schedule, what other funds do you have available? And it does say supporting documentation will be required to verify this. So even if it's a line of credit, you could have a line of credit with the bank, an open line of credit. We need to see that it's not all charged up. You're going to use a credit card, and you've got to show that it's not all charged up and that there's that amount available. And it's got to be enough so that you can operate for a couple of months. Now, in my time of being involved with the CACFP, been since 2006 now, that has never happened, but that's not to say that it can't. We just don't know. I mean, we've had the government shut down at one point and it went on for quite some time. So there's things completely out of our control that could interrupt our payments to you guys. Okay, so you've got to have procedures that demonstrate adequate financial operation or adequate management of financial operations to ensure fiscal integrity and accountability for all program funds. Do you understand this? So the next part goes into you explaining your procedures. So if you're under a church and the church supports it, your church should be able to provide something, some kind of statement. I even have one situation, a sponsor who they have a wealthy person in their town that has agreed to lend them the money if that ever happens. But what we required for them to have was a written agreement that was enough to cover her for a couple of 2 or 3 months. And it was a written agreement between the two. I mean, something like that would be sufficient where both parties signed off on it. We just need some kind of proof that if something happens, you've got some other funding coming in. Okay, so some of you that are renewing, you should know how to answer these questions. You really should. We just make them sound way harder than what they are to answer, okay? For your newbies, we're basically stating what's required, and we want you to state back to us what your plan is to meet the requirements. So explain your plan and procedures your institution will implement to ensure the integrity and accountability of all program expenses, yada, yada, yada. Basically what we're saying is like, how are you going to ensure that CACFP funds will only be used for allowable costs according to CACFP? And how do you plan to record and maintain the records of those purchases? That's all we're needing to know. We provide everything you need to be able to do that, and you'll learn that in the training. Either you come the training, the 1 6-hour training, or if you have to come to when they're broken up. Regardless, you'll be taught how to use the food purchasing forms and the expenditure worksheets, and we provide everything you need to be able to record these. If all you use is what we provide you, then that's 100% okay. But if you have anything above and beyond, we need to know about that too. Keep in mind, if you have forms that you create on your own, you have to get it approved by our office or your consultant. But sometimes, if you're using, and I'm jumping ahead here, but if you're using any type of electronic system, you're going to be able to pull reports for us that could be better than our expenditure worksheet. It could be way more detailed. So we just need to know what we're looking for when we come out to do a review, and we need to make sure that it's in compliance with regulation. Oh, dang it. I'm sorry I keep doing that. Okay, so describe your institution's current accounting method. If you don't know what it's called or what these mean, just explain to us how you record your expenses. So most of you are probably going to be accrual. That basically just means you pay it as you get the bill. When it's owed, you pay it. But what's important to remember about CACFP is that cost for September has to be recorded with September. So you might not be paying the electric bill until October, but it needs to be allocated to September because that's when the cost happened. And down here, please describe your accounting method and how will it clearly present information. So it's just going into more detail. Explain how you plan to document when a CACFP related cost was incurred and when it will be recorded. It sounds like we're just asking for the nitty gritty stuff, but we really are okay, I'm going to record it as every expense happens. I'm going to put it on the expenditure worksheet, or I'm going to enter it in on my Excel spreadsheet, or whatever you use. It is really, those questions are making it sound harder than it really is. How are you going to record that where the related costs incurred? Explain how you plan to document what the CACFP related cost was for and in the amount. These three answers might be pretty simple or similar, and they're also very simple. We just want to know when and how and where you're going to record these costs. Okay. If you use any type of accounting software, we need to know. If not, no big deal. But even if you use Microsoft Excel, put that there, because when our consultants come out, they're going to be like, hey, they use Excel. This could really make my life a lot easier because that's easier to look something up. But if you don't, if you just use our paperwork and that's it, that's good enough. And you can just put NA. But some other examples would be like ProCare, Minute Menu. Those have some accounting features in it. And then some of you use QuickBooks. And like I said, QuickBooks, some of these systems could produce really awesome detailed reports that would be helpful for producing your expenses and revenues when we come out to look at those things. E, F, and G, we just need to know about the person who's responsible for doing certain things. So who's responsible for developing your budget? Who's responsible for reviewing it and comparing it to the actual expenses? So it's great to have a projected budget, but you got to make sure it's really what's happening, right? And as the year progresses, you might have a projected approved budget, but it might change. So you need to be mindful of when you need to make any budget revisions. And that's what G is about. This next section is about commingled accounts. Commingled just means you have a bank account that you've got multiple sources of income coming in and different reasons you're spending money. If you have one business account and you got DHS and then you're putting your private pay and deposits and then you're going to have us deposit CACFP into it, that's a commingled account. Totally allowable, totally okay. Makes it a little harder for us to track where the dollar is going, but if you're documenting your records, your expenses properly, we can see that. You know, you have to have an approved budget. You've got to record everything on your expenditure worksheets or whatever you use during the month. Then you got to have the receipts that back up those expenditures. And then your bank record should also support those purchases. All those things should align. And that's what we're after here. We need you to explain to us your plan to make sure that happens. So if you have a commingled account, how are you going to keep those things separate? If all you're going to use is our expenditure worksheet and the materials we provide you, that's enough. But you have to keep up with it, like I said, and make sure that your receipts match your purchasing forms and your expenditure worksheets and your bank records. And many of you haven't even maybe heard of those forms yet. And I will, if you have, well, you guys will learn about it in the training, the other trainings you have to come to. But you should all have access to the training manual with all those forms on it. I highly suggest you get onto our resource library and look for the training manual. If you can't find it, let me know. I'll email it to you, and you'll see right there exactly all the forms you need to be using to record these expenses. Something else that's important for you to understand, that if at any point we put funds into an account and you transfer funds to another account, or you pay a credit card bill with funds with the account that our funds are going into, we're going to have to see those records too, because we have to be able to track the dollar. So if you don't want us looking at every credit card bill and every bank account you have, I go back to recommending you have one account where CACFP funds go into and one account where CACFP funds come out of. If that's your answer to how you will address being commingled, that you're going to open a separate account, we will ask for proof of that before you're approved. Okay, capability. You got to say, yeah, you understand that you've got to be capable. A and B get looked over a lot because you're just saying like, yeah, I'll provide that, and then you forget. And that's why I also created a cover letter that you guys should have gotten that helps you kind of make sure, like, before you turn it in, you've got everything with it. We need your organizational chart. I don't even care, and I'm the one approving these DCA 99% of the time. I don't care if you hand draw it on paper sack. It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't have to be fancy. We just need to know who's at the top and who's at the bottom. Who is the head honcho in your organization and who's all the way at the bottom, just so we know who does what. But then we also need a list of personnel who have CACFP responsibilities. So if that's one thing you provide, if you want to make a chart and then designate a way to show the person who has CACFP responsibilities and it includes their name and title and what they do, that's fine too. Doesn't have to be fancy. All we're after is making sure we know who does what in your organization. C, who is responsible for hiring personnel? That's generally just one or two people. Oops, darn it. So list the person who's responsible for that. When will new personnel receive training on CACFP duties? The important thing to know what not to say here is something like within 90 days or something like that. The right answer is they will receive training on CACFP duties prior to having any CACFP duties. You can't have someone doing anything CACFP if they've not been trained. And then who's responsible for training? This next page can be confusing because it looks like we're just asking for something about just about board members, but we're asking about your owners. If you have any for-profit officers or anything like that. If you have a board, you got to list everything here. You got to list the entire board. If you just have owners, we need every owner, and we need all this information because we have to know if you're related, if they're somewhere else in the application. When you get to the online portion, you even ask if they're compensated on your board members. So, darn it, I am so sorry. So make sure you don't leave any of these blank. Like, these are all required. We need the name, we need the position or title of the person, we need the relationship to you of that person, and then their date of birth. This one too, I think people sometimes will just be like NA because they say describe how the owner, and I changed it around because it used to say governing board was the first word, and they were like, I don't have a board, so this doesn't apply. No, this question applies to everyone, right? Everyone has to have oversight, whether it's by a board, an owner, what have you. You have to have oversight of the program. So explain here how you have oversight of that program. And if you do have yes, sorry, I'm going back to the question. Yes, school board members. That's what goes on this page. We go here, every single one. So explain to me how you're going to make sure, and this is just give you a simple answer. You're going to review menus. If somebody else is recording meal counts, you're just going to double check to make sure that they're accurate. You're going to review your cook's menus to make sure meal patterns are met. You're going to double count everything before you submit your claim. General things that just tell us, how are you going to make sure this program is being operated properly and that your claims are going to be submitted correctly. Program accountability. Okay. You have to say you understand. I mean, you could say no, but then we'd have to come back and talk about that. But you've got to understand these regs. And these questions, hopefully, are broken down to where you understand what we're after here. So you have to explain your planned procedures for the following. How do you plan to make sure your meals are going to meet meal patterns? Okay, that would be another one that if you're not familiar, and we briefly talked about it in this training, Go pull up the resources in the resource library. Look at what the meal patterns are. I mean, that itself is a response. I'm going to follow the meal patterns chart. I'm going to create menus that I make that, you know, and I'll review them to ensure they're meeting meal patterns. Income eligibility and enrollment information must be collected annually. We talked about that. It's not applicable for everyone. So if it's not for you, explain that. But for those that it is applicable, what's your process? How do you plan to collect those yearly? Is it going to be every July or August when we release them? Are you just going to do them all in October during the application renewal? We don't care as long as you have a procedure and you follow it. Explain how you're going to maintain your records daily. They have to be maintained daily. So just briefly tell us what your plan is, how you're going to ensure they're maintained. Are your teachers going to take meal counts? Is your cook going to take meal counts? Does your cook record the menu? Do you record it? You got to just tell us who's doing what. And then explain to us how you ensure your claims will be processed accurately in a timely manner. And by process, we mean, how are you going to make sure they're correct? And look at them, make sure they're accurate, and then make sure they're turned in on time. And as I explained earlier, claims are due by the 10th of the month. That's kind of a little bit of a moot point now because we pay every week, like I said, but we really would encourage you to get them turned in as close to that as possible because it helps us. It helps our reports be accurate. So what's your plan for ensuring that they're going to be accurate and timely submitted? These next questions talk about record retention, okay? You have to keep your records for the current year and 3 years past. So we need to know where you're going to keep those. We need to know very specifically what's your plan for how those will be retained, who will have access, where will they be stored, how will you ensure they're secured? That's what all these questions are about. We have a very real example of just this last year of someone who unfortunately couldn't make it to their center when we showed up for a review. She had the only key to the file cabinet where the records were, but for whatever reason, she never showed up to produce the key. And that person that was down SD. And it could have been solved simply by allowing someone else to have access to that key to that file cabinet so we could have seen the records, right? So that we need it to be that specific to know who has access and where those records can be found. Because unfortunately, you could have to pay back an entire fiscal year's worth of money if we can't see your records. Okay, and this is pretty much the last page. And it gets overlooked, and I keep trying to make the box bigger, so hopefully it won't get overlooked. But I've gone on and on about this on other sections. But what funds are you going to use to repay any debt owed to us? And that's what these are about. There is going to come a time, I can assure you, that you're going to have to pay some money back. It's not, you're going to have some non-compliances, and you may have to pay money back. It's not serious. It's not serious at all. It happens. But you got to have the money to pay it back. The wrong answer here is that I'll let it come out of my CACFP claims. Although, if you've participated, if you're renewing or you're SD or you've been on before, you might know that we take in amounts out of claims, future claims. But the only reason we're allowed to do that is because that's with the understanding that you have some supplemental income coming in to cover the amount you're not paid, right? So you can't say, I'm just going to use CACFP funds to pay for it, because you can't use CACFP funds to pay for any bad debt, especially CACFP bad debt. So put what your other funds are there that you're going to pay us back with. And then please be sure to sign it and print your name. I get so many in with no signature, and I can't process it without a signature. After the VCA is approved, we'll be done in maybe about 5 minutes, not that much longer. No worries. So once you get the VCA done, this is y'all's goal, all the new ones in here right now. If you didn't get the VCA emailed to you, I'm putting my email address in here right now in the chat. Email me, I'll send it to you. I'll make sure you get it, because you can't get to the next steps until we get the VCA approved, okay? And we've kind of changed up how we've been doing things, and some of you might already have access to the system, and we just like to make things confusing, I guess. But we've really kind of changed things up so we can make sure we're helping you guys get this VCA done and making sure that we can follow you through on the process so you don't get lost, okay? So once the VCA is approved or completed, you're going to send it to me. I'll reach out to you, any other things that we need. And once it gets approved, then you'll get access to our system. You have to complete the certificate of authority. And if you are the head honcho person, you're the approving official, it is a little confusing, but say you're the owner and you're filling this form out, you fill all this out, you got to check, oh, I did it again. These are interactive forms, so there are drop downs. If it doesn't work for you, holler at us, because sometimes people, it doesn't work on their browsers. But you're going to choose the type of user, choose the security question, and then you're going to sign. But then if you're the owner person or the executive director or something like that, the superintendent, you're going to type your name here, and then you'll just sign again here as authorized rep. But everyone else who you have authority over, so like if you're an owner and you also want your assistant director or your director or whatnot to have access, you'll need to sign off on as the approving official on all those other ones. I just had a question. If you submit a VCA by the end of the month, would be able to start by the following month? I can't guarantee that, because once you get the VCA done, you still have training and an online application, some applications online to fill out. And then from the moment that your online application is submitted, then we have to contact your consultant, and they have 30 days to come out and conduct a review. So it's possible, but it's unlikely. So once you get access to the system, I'll send you some training information. It'll look a lot like this, but like I explained earlier, this administrative and purchasing training and the meal patterns requirement training are now kind of combined into one training. It's just our 6-hour manual training. So don't let that confuse you. When you get past the VCA, I'll send you your training packet, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to attend, and you can go from there. But there are other trainings. You have to have civil rights training, and then you still have your application training. That's a training that will help you fill out the application online, one form at a time. This is what the online application looks like. This is your very last step before your consultant will come out. So depending on what type of institution you are will determine the different forms required here on this page, but it virtually looks the same. Everyone has this viability, capability, and accountability questionnaire, and that somebody asked about that earlier. You're going to find a lot of the same questions on this form that you're going to fill out on that VCA. Just put the same things on those questions that they were approved in the form. If you've already had some trainings, Deborah, we'll work with you, because I know some of you have already started the process. So we'll work together and make sure you get all the right ones. Can I go over the board members again? Do we have to have board members? No. The only institutions that are required to have a board are nonprofits, and if you're incorporated. If you're just a for-profit owner of a daycare, you do not have to have a board, but you still have to list yourself and any other owners on that page. And that's where folks get confused on this page. They think, oh, this is just for board members. And I kind of try to change some of the verbiage so you understand that we need to know who's responsible. And if you have a board, it's the board. But if you're an owner, it's the owner. Does that answer your question, Jillian? Okay. So like I said, this is the last step, and I know it's cumbersome. And by the time you guys get to this, you're like, I thought I already did all this. But we're going to get through it. So your first step is to get that VCA turned into me. Please remember to submit it with all the supporting documentation. That's why I made that cover letter, so it can kind of help prompt you to remember what's in there or what's required. And then we can get you access to the system and do your training. If when you're filling out the VCA, you feel like you don't really know how to respond on some of these because you're not sure what you plan to do and you feel like you need more training, let me know. I'll get you hooked up in some training. I'll send you the link to some Zoom classes, just like I did for this one, without having to have access to the system. No, see, if you already have access to the system and you've not done the VCA, that's where I've said we've kind of changed the process, because what was happening was we were giving people the VCA document and saying, hey, we have this training you need to come to, and then they were turning in the VCA and not doing the training. And then it's just been like a vicious cycle. So we're trying to kind of put our cart behind our horse, if that makes sense. So just reach out to me. If you don't know if your VCA is completed or approved, then it's probably not. If you already have access to the system, that's fine, but we still need to get your VCA approved. And if I've just confused the heck out of you, Julie, you're welcome to email me and I'll pull your file and we'll see exactly where you stand. The vast majority of people in this training right now, this is really the first thing they've done. They don't have access and they should have the VCA document now. Okay, that would be perfect. Any other questions? I know this is a lot to take in. Chances are when you submit the VCA, I may have to reach out to you for something, but don't hold off and not submit it. Submit it and we'll go from there. If it needs some fluffing and some better answers, send it to me and we'll work through it together, okay? This is the most tedious part of the application process. Once you get past it, it's smooth sailing. Any questions? You guys are quiet. Like I said, if any of you on here are confused about where you're at in the status of your application process, because some of you, there are a few in here, don't be overwhelmed. Just reach out to me. I'll pull your file and I will send you a checklist, a step-by-step of what you need to do. A public school, you guys have audits. So the question is, would all financial documents for public schools still need to be given? An audit, your financial audit that schools have to have anyway, would be sufficient for a school in lieu of any type of other financial documentation. Yeah. I can have Kendra send these slides to you guys, to all the everybody that registered. Would you like that? Yes. Anyone can send me an email. What I'm going to do is get the registration list of everyone that attended the full time of this training. And I'm going to pull your file and I'll reach out to you and let you know exactly what we need to do. If you just applied and the first thing you got from me was the email saying you need to come here, then you need to do the VCA. That's your goal. You need to get this VCA completed. But I will be reaching out to everyone that's on this training and we will make sure that you know exactly what you need to do, okay? Okay. All right, guys, I'll be talking to you soon. I'll get the slide sent to you. Hopefully that will be helpful and we will talk to you soon.